Alright, so I've already done a bad job of following my own rules. It's just too fun to play with, so I already turned it on because the idle was so bad it actually bothered me enough to do it. And it's still so weird to just see a carburetor basically correct itself. It just feels wrong. But let's turn this thing off and on and just take a look. Totally wild. Alright, so we're maintaining a good idle RPM, good idle AFR. Let's turn this thing off now. You heard the idle instantly drop. Both, we wanted it both. And then we're gonna pick idle RPM. And you can just hear it take off right away. And we're right back to a good idle RPM. And if we pick idle RPM, it will target an idle RPM within an AFR range. Not to mention, finally having a speedometer in this truck is awful handy. Howdy my friends, and welcome to the channel today. I'm Luke, Thunderhead289, here on YouTube. Now today, we're going to be installing a carb cheater on this old truck. If you're watching this video, you've probably already bought a carb cheater, but anyway, if you haven't, if you're curious what a carb cheater is, I guess in the simplest form, have you ever seen a standard carburetor automatically adjust itself? Well, today you will. So with that, let's get to it. Here, we're in central Iowa, so you either get a windstorm, torrential rainpour, or a snowstorm, or a tornado, you know, one of those four things. So today we're battling the wind. But getting to it here, if you're familiar with me, you know that I think that carburetors are great. But at the end of the day, this is just a static metering device in a dynamic environment. Now couple that with the time involved and the difficulty associated with playing the infinite guessing game with a carb to figure out what you got to do to get it tuned right, and that's 95% of the reason that folks are afraid of carbs and shy away from them. You know, and Carb Cheater fixes all that for you, where it handles all those weird anomalies, but still allows the carburetor to do what it's best at. I don't know if you can hear the wind noise, but it's pretty excessive. I worked every day, like all of you, and I only have the weekend to do stuff like this, and the weather is just not cooperating. I'll wait. Now, a word of caution if you're following along with this video installing a carb cheater today. Don't let this product ruin your life. So it's real easy to get addicted to the thing and just have it always open on your dash. You have far more capability in the palm of your hand with tuning, engine data, telemetry than you've ever had before, especially with a carbureted engine. And it's real easy to just be watching that thing all the time, always have it open on your dash. You know, I highly encourage you to close your app and just enjoy the world around you, enjoy driving your hot rod or whatever ride it is you're installing this on. You know, because again, it's real easy just to watch this thing all the time. And it's a lot of fun, but I don't want to take away from what we're actually trying to do with this and help you just enjoy your car. Now myself and Joe, we completely designed, built, and bootstrapped this project all ourselves. And in doing that, we were able to maintain an affordable price and have full control over Carb Cheater decisions, which basically equates to a better product for you. You know, basically a product for the people, by the people type of thing. We work normal jobs like you guys throughout the week, but we're pretty good about responding to emails. So if you want to get in contact with us directly, go to the email link below or go to our website, which is below, and go through the contact setup there. But anyway, with that, enough talking. Let's jump into getting this thing installed. It's honestly so easy, it'll almost make you mad. And we tried to do that for you because lengthy installs just aren't that fun. This one's pretty simple. All right, so Our installation victim today is my dad's late 60s Ford F100. It's had a few things done to it, but it's largely very original. It's a typical Iowa farm truck, and it's pretty much been like this its entire life. Largely original, has a few upgrades, 4-barrel intake and carb, Pertronics retrofit, ignition that I put in 5 or 6 years ago, and then it has a 4-speed close ratio top loader versus the 3-speed on the column. We recently did that when I got a swinging deal on the 4-speed, and I thought it'd be a good gift for my dad, and it drives really nice. We really like it. So in the case of this vehicle, the first thing I need to do is get the air filter housing and carburetor off of the engine. There's a few different ways you can skin this cat, but we put a spacer adapter in the kit where if you do have a 4-barrel intake, this is exceptionally easy where you don't have to think at all, and that just happens to be what this truck is. So let me get all that off, and then we'll look at all what comes in the kit. Little tech tip here is I know some people have a tendency to be afraid of removing their carb. One thing that's always annoyed me is that the fuel tends to run everywhere. So if you get a pair of needle nose vice grips and put some rubber tube on it, shove it in here, now you've basically shut off your fuel line. The fuel pump cannot supply the carb, and now you can fire the engine and essentially run the carb dry before removing it, and then you don't spill gasoline all over the place. So here we go. Fires right up. This is the slowest responding tach I've ever seen. You can tell with the exhaust note and the tach, they're totally not in sequence. So anyway, you know, now it's just gonna run, idle, and the carburetor is gonna run out of fuel, and then it's not this horrific mess when you go to pull it off. Real easy. All right, we got the carburetor off and just simply cantilevered out of the way. So at this point, this is where you would install your spacer if you have a 4-barrel intake. Now, the spacer has caused a lot of confusion where people think that it's only for a 4-barrel. Now again, I just did this to make it really easy for everyone to install this. Now, when I originally designed this product, I did not use this spacer, and most carbs have 2 big vacuum ports. This black capped one I'm pointing to here, and then the one where the PCV valve is hooked in back here. So, you know, you always want your PCV on a dedicated, nothing teed into it, a dedicated centralized vacuum port. You know, this is plumbed into the center of the throttle blades, so you know it's not biasing to any one cylinder or another. That would be bad. So it's the only thing on this vacuum line. And then for our Carb Cheater setup, we're going to want to go to the front primary throttle bore at a centralized location. Now in a lot of Holley carburetors, you already have this, Edelbrock included, where you already have this port. And then you might ask, well, what about your power brakes? Now this vehicle does not have that, but most intakes have a port on them for, you know, something such as power brakes, and that's generally where I'd hook that in. Now, if that's all confusing, you can simply use this, and this gives you an additional 2 manifold vacuum ports, and this is highly insulative. You know, carburetor insulation is super important, and this is just a heck of a spacer and about the best material you can use for it. So with that, let's go look at everything the kit comes with and then move on with our installation. All right, so here's all of the goodies that come in your Carb Cheater box. Now, we're probably going to change how we're doing this, but at the moment, these are very important, and do not lose these. Write these down somewhere. But all that aside, here's what comes in the kit: the spacer, gaskets, obviously. And as far as the spacer goes, it comes with the hardware, the extended studs to accommodate the spacer, your valve, your map sensor, all that good stuff, the filter for it, some vacuum line, obviously your Carb Cheater module box, your full harness kit with your wideband. You have a weld-in bung or a clamp-on bung, and we'll see that why we included this on this truck. The exhaust is really rusty, and we would definitely never get the weld-on bung to cooperate, so we'll see that for the O2. And then, you know, really, that's it. It's 4 wires, 2 vacuum lines, and a wideband O2 tap. You don't have to run any wires into the vehicle, into the cab, and, you know, you're done. So we'll jump right in here. Oh, and Joe really wanted to include, this is called a long nib marker. It's the weirdest thing, but if you're going to transfer a hole, you know, such as this, you can really get down and transfer the hole really well. So anyway, we just included that for fun. All right, so installing the Carb Cheater spacer here, you need to change out your studs. Now, sometimes your studs will be loose, sometimes they'll be real tight. So you definitely want to put some rags in the intake. The last thing you want to do when you're trying to do this is drop anything in there, and then you're going to have a really bad day. So anyway, I just jam nutted 2 of the stud nuts together from the original stock here, and then easily broke that loose, and then out she goes. But again, please don't drop anything in your intake when you're doing this. Be patient. Now, if you noticed here, when I originally removed the carb, there was not any leftover gasket material. You know, everyone hates scraping gaskets, so to save yourself from doing that, an old timer trick that I was taught some 10 years ago is to basically lather up your gaskets really good with wheel bearing grease. It just seems wrong at the time, but I'll tell you what, you go to take these off 5-10 years later, they come off in one piece, and basically you can even reuse them. Now this is gonna feel weird and dumb, but I promise you, you'll thank yourself later. And don't be tempted to wipe off the excess, because after this thing goes through a heat cycle, this will all soak into the gasket, and it'll do a really good job of basically immortalizing the gasket forever. I apologize for all the tech tips as we go along here. You know what they say, old habits. Oh, that reminds me, I got one more here. Now, when you have your carburetor off, it is a fine time to look at your vacuum caps. The vacuum caps from the factory are made of rubber. They don't last very long, and I highly recommend the nylon vacuum caps like I have on this carburetor from any parts store, or I'll leave a link below. But as you can see here, after less than a year of this carburetor just being in my possession, the vacuum caps have cracked, and those would definitely manifest themselves as small anomalous vacuum leaks. And if you have big ports capped, you know, you can get a pretty nasty vacuum leak, and it's kind of hard to track down. So again, when the carb's off, definitely take a look at this stuff. Edelbrock, Holley, all the same deal. The rubber vacuum caps, you know, they don't last very long. So getting your carburetor studs here installed for the spacer, you just don't be lazy. Make sure you run them down all the way. What, do you want to be that guy that has all these different length carb bolts? Of course you don't. So you can do the same trick, just jam nut it. Some of them could be tight. This intake manifold's ancient, so this one was a little tight here, just a simple jam nut, and then we can run it down same as the others. And again, you want to keep your rags in your intake through all this, because really ruin your day if you drop something in there. All right, so installing the gaskets, our open gasket is going to go on the bottom. If you dropped your 4-hole gasket in there, I mean, it would just be flapping in the breeze and eventually get sucked in the engine. And I've seen people do this a lot, so, you know, definitely don't do that. So there's our first gasket. We're gonna take our carb spacer and we're gonna look at it. These ports are actually angled up or down. We want them biased down, and ultimately we'll emboss this so you know which side is the top or the bottom. But I can see that the air goes in and then it curves down here. So this is technically the top. It can go either way. There's no particular way in that regard. And then we're going to install the spacer. Maybe, if I can do it with one hand, there we go. All right, and then our other gasket that's hanging out up here, drop right in on top. And you can see how that grease is already soaked in quite a bit to the gasket. Now with that, we can throw our carburetor back on, which is pretty straightforward assembly. Now when reinstalling your carb, really resist the urge to gorilla arm your carb studs and warp your carb. A lot of people do this, not sure why. You know, it doesn't take a lot of force to seal this carburetor to the intake. So a nice X pattern on tighten down, and you know, just tight, but you don't have to put all of your strength into it. You know, just be reasonable with it and you won't have any issues. All right, so spacer's installed, carburetor's back on, and hopefully you learned something along the way. As you see, pretty easy, and you don't have to really think about it. So with that, let's move to the next, probably hardest part of this install, the wideband O2 sensor. It can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. Let's get it done. All right, our old friend, the wideband O2. So again, we're not going to use the weld-in bung. Got a couple of different size clamps for the different size exhaust and our stainless steel gasketed clamp-on piece. Now, installing this can be difficult, and if you're looking at an exhaust pipe running down your vehicle, you don't want to be side to side, and you definitely don't want to be pointing down. You want to come in from an upwards angle on the exhaust. Now that can be tricky because, you know, it's kind of tight, but you can pick these bad boys up on Amazon for like $15, and I highly recommend them. They're handy to have anyway. I'll leave the link to this one below, but just this and a simple step bit, and this whole procedure gets really easy. So with that, let's figure out where we're going to put this thing. Now this truck is going to be a curious install that touches on a lot of good points here. If you look down here, this goes into a Y pipe. These are the stock manifolds naturally, and you can see right down here, this is a piece of flex pipe. So there's a good chance that there's leaks, and we definitely don't want to install our wideband downstream of any exhaust leaks, because that'll give us a faulty reading, same as you would have on a fuel injected car. So in this case, we're going to target this one tube from our passenger side cylinder bank. You know, a lot of folks get tripped up because they think that they need a signal from both banks. Dual planes, single planes, both sides of the carb feed one side of the engine depending on the cylinder. You'll see on dual planes the intake runners wrap around and everything. So unless you have a dead cylinder via ignition, you know, everything should be equal if your carb is adjusted evenly, which it should be if you're doing it right. So anyway, we're going to tap into this tube right here, and we'll have a perfectly good reading from it, no problem. And like any installation of anything, mock-up is always something to consider. So again, we want to go into the top of the tube, but you want to remember that, you know, we have all of this auxiliary stuff coming off our sensor where we don't want to have it conflicting with our firewall. That would be pretty unfortunate to drill a bad hole. So obviously, we can put it on the inside of the tube pointing up towards the tunnel, and we'll be just fine. All right, and as you can see there, we got a good hole in the exhaust with our step bit. You want to make sure you don't go all the way through one side and through the other, depending on what size step bit you use. This was a 3/4, and it worked pretty good. But yeah, step bits, probably the best invention since, I don't know, cheesecake or something. So with that, I'm going to get our wideband installed here. It's a good idea to put your clamp-on adapter in a vise and spin your wideband O2 sensor into that before you go to install it, which I've already done here. All right, so with that, the wideband O2 is all installed, and you can see it's pretty easy to do. Now I have a lot of testing time on this type of adapter, the no weld version, which again is nice because there was no way we were going to weld to this effectively. But I have, you know, like 20,000 miles on one of these, and it's never melted, and I've got it pretty darn hot. So I'm pretty confident that these will do the job. The only thing I don't love about them is the aesthetics, but if your exhaust is rusty anyway, they're a good solution. Not to mention, if you don't have a welder, you don't have to wait on someone else to get a bung welded into your exhaust for you for your wideband O2, and they're in every kit. So with that, what I would consider to be the two hardest parts of this whole thing done. So now it's just fun from this point on. I guess with that, we'll get our control box installed and run our vacuum lines, and we're just about done with this thing, really. All right, so I think I'm gonna land the control box here and the valve on the fender well for now. I'm going to just zip tie these in, but under normal circumstances, you would use the long nib marker, you know, if you wanted to. It's kind of a fun thing to use. Transfer your holes and then run your pre-drill for your sheet metal screws, and then run your sheet metal screws in. Pretty straightforward installation. Now this being my dad's truck, you know, he might have a differing opinion on where he might want this thing installed, so for now we're just going to zip tie it in. Now on the part of the valve, you can actually mount these in separate locations. We did provide in the kit an extension kit So you could install the valve closer to the engine on the intake manifold or so if you really wanted to. Now, very loosely here, the bigger the engine, the nicer it is to have the valve closer. Obviously, the more tube you have, the more restriction you have, but really it doesn't take a whole lot to make a huge alteration in your air-fuel ratio. So for now, we're just going to leave our box here and it'll be pretty easy. All right, I just tossed our vacuum lines in here for now in case my father were to want to change this, move this somewhere else. I left him a lot of extra length where he could do something different. Now, the important piece of this part of the installation is we can see that the front hose goes to the port in line with the valve. So right in line with the valve here. Now our map sensor is going to the back of our spacer. Now, if you didn't have the spacer, again, you could tie the map sensor to the brake booster, you know, somewhere on the manifold. It doesn't have to be a centralized port. But again, you don't want to tee into the PCV valve and you don't want to tee anything off of your Carb Cheater main valve. Both of these items need to be on a centralized, dedicated port where they're even to both throttle bores and there's nothing tied into them. Again, that's extremely important. All right, so we got our wiring harness popped in here. It's just a simple plug-in over center connection, real easy. Our connector's plugged in here to our valve. And our wideband, which I've actually never ran a wideband this direction, but it just worked out really nice on this truck, is all plugged in back there. I need to zip tie it to something so it doesn't flap around in the breeze. Side note on all of these connectors, you want to hear them click in, and you think that that's obvious, but you know, sometimes like the Bosch widebands, when we use a true Bosch wideband, they really take some force to click in. So you need to make sure you hear the click or else it's going to come unconnected. And don't be surprised if you have to push them with some force the first times. These are all brand new, and so sometimes it takes a little bit of effort than other times. But anyway, they're all clicked in, we're good. Now we'll take a look at the wiring, and if you have a beta test version, which this one is, you have 2 black wires. So let's take a look at that for a second. So looking at the dominant wires that you need to run this system, you have a black and a red wire. If you're looking at the connector with the top of the box face up, purple over center latch here, the black wire that's biased to that side with the red wire, this is your battery, positive and negative. So red being positive, black being negative. You know, you can hook these right to your battery, find a positive source, but these need to be always hot. You know, you can take them right to your battery, and that's an easy install if, you know, the electrical side kind of concerns you. Now the other 2 that are important are your green wire and your yellow wire, and these go to the coil, the green wire being the negative on the coil, the yellow wire being the positive on the coil. And I'll get that all wired up and we'll take a look at that again. Now these wires you don't necessarily need. This is if you have an auxiliary wideband, you already have a wideband, you don't need one from the kit. This is where you tag into the analog signal from your wideband gauge you already have. So Carb Cheater can accommodate an existing wideband, or we have our own on board that you can use. So then we have these 2 leads here, which on the beta version, you know, this is the only instance that these wire colors exist. These are the dry contact wires for the auxiliary relay. Now what's a dry contact? Basically, it goes in and it goes out, and we're just closing a relay. So you can wire this right to the battery, and maybe from the battery to the choke. There's a few things we can do with that, and I'll make an offshoot video for that specifically, but it's a really cool thing that we put in here that you can actually do a lot with. But for now, we don't need these to run, so I'm going to wrap these up and stow them away and get these wires landed for you. So now our basic Carb Cheater preliminary installation as far as wiring goes is complete. Actually, I think we're done, so that was pretty quick. So again, you have the red and the black wire. The red wire, we're going to the positive. The black wire, we're going to the negative of the battery. Now I'm just doing this to show you. What I would normally do is probably run the black wire up to behind this bolt and get a good ground, and the red wire down here. I don't really love running stuff to the battery, but again, if you're afraid of messing with electrical, this makes it really simple. So now we ran the yellow and green wire over here. Our yellow wire on top is on the positive of the ignition coil, and our green wire is on the negative of the ignition coil. Really straightforward. Now, one new thing we added to the kit were these fuses. There's a 2 amp fuse and a 7.5 amp fuse. Now the 7.5 amp fuse should go to your battery tap, and the 2 amp fuse should go to your ignition coil. Now where you would place these is as close to the power source as possible. So they'd be as close as possible to the ignition source, as close as possible to the battery source. That's why we don't have them tagged into our loom, because technically you need to clip them and use our supplied splicers and put them in. Now, our circuit is protected, but the reason for this is if you were to, say, this red wire were to get nicked somewhere, you know, and it were to be grounding to, say, the fender, basically it would be a dead short from the battery to the fender, and it could cause a fire. So again, when using the fuses, you want them as close to the power source as possible, and that's why they're not attached to our loom, so you can cut our loom to the size that you want. So anyway, that's the long and short of that, and I think at this point we're installed and we can install our app and get everything fired up. So at this point we're done with the physical installation. You know, it took like an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I've been talking this whole time to the camera here. So super easy to do, not hard on your back. Again, didn't have to run anything into the cab of the vehicle, which I've never liked, you know, laying under the dash. So you don't have to do any of that. And it's, you know, pretty straightforward. So with that, I think we're ready to download the app and connect to this thing, fire the truck up. Let's do it. All right, so to get our app, we're gonna go to the Play Store, and I'm left-handed, and this is my right hand, so this will be an adventure. We're gonna type in Carb Cheater. There we go. Okay, so on the App Store here, you can see Carb Cheater Beta from Carbureted Innovations. Kind of read the little blurb on it here, not important, because you've already purchased it, so we're installing the thing at this point. Okay. And we're going to wait because we're in a building, with a metal roof, and I always hit my head on that, like anyone does who owns an F100. Okay, we're downloaded, gonna hit open. Now it's gonna ask you a series of permissions. This first one is for your location. Now the way I program this app is it does not run in the background. So when you're not on the app, it's not looking at anything. But to get your mile per hour speed, you need to allow this. So while using this app, okay, and it should pop the other permission, but I don't think it did just yet. So depends on the phone. Gonna close it, we're gonna reopen it, there we go. Do you want it to allow Bluetooth? Basically. Okay, so there we go. So now we have our Carb Cheater app effectively downloaded. So now we'll cycle on our key and connect to the module. I'll show you how to do that. All right, we are sitting in the truck now. We have the key in the on position. So now we're going to go to Bluetooth. So let me just show you that again so that's real easy to understand. On an Android phone, a lot of times you'll swipe down, you'll see this Bluetooth icon. You'll hold that and it will come up. Now I accidentally already connected to this one, but if you haven't before, if you scroll to the bottom, it will be refreshing and it will pop up. But the first time you connect, you'll see it that way, and it should look like Carb Cheater here, just like this. And it will prompt you with putting in a password. And it's 0123 or 1234. It tells you on the pop-up what it is. So you only have to do this once, the very first time, and then you never have to go in there and do that again. From this point, you'll go in, you'll open your Carb Cheater app, and it's never connected to anything, so it will not auto-connect. So we're going to go to Connect Module, and then we're going to go to Carb Cheater right here. So there we go. So the first time, it's going to ask for a product key. Now this is the number on your box. Now this was a setup module in particular, so this one's 9999. No other ones are like that, just this one. Everyone will have a unique key, so essentially someone can't connect to your vehicle and mess with your car. So each Carb Cheater has a unique key. Don't lose that. We have record of it, so if you do lose it, you can contact us and we can tell you what yours is. So with that, we hit OK, and that's the only time we really have to do that. And this is kind of how you get to the setup screen. So you can kind of see different settings. It's set up for a V8 rev limiter 5000. You can kind of see what it's factory set up to. And so we can get more into that later, but you shouldn't have to touch anything if you're on a V8. If you're not, you can just follow the setup prompts there and it'll be real easy. So now we're connected, everything's good. I've played with this module before. Normally, auto tune will be off the first time you connect to a Carb Cheater. So let me just close out of this and show you how it opens normal. So it's going to auto connect. So then it asks you the same question. Now you saw we already put in our product key before. Now the app remembers it and it will send that product key again to the module if we just hit OK and don't put anything in. So see there, we're connected, and under normal circumstances when you connect, it's going to go to your main screen, your main gauge screen, just like this. So now just roll the key on. And our carburetor is completely empty from our spacer installation. There we go. All right. We got a pretty handy gauge display here. Again, you have power in the palm of your hand like you've never had before. Now once you have everything connected, Carb Cheater installed, app installed, you've connected to it and set everything up, but you can see, super easy. I want you to drive around with auto tune off for a while. I want you to get a feel for what the engine does on its own before you enable auto tune. You know, Carb Cheater can do quite a bit, but if you're way whacked out, it's not gonna save you. You know, it might band-aid something to some degree, but what we're trying to do is get your carburetor dialed in pretty good and let Carb Cheater handle the anomalies. That was the idea behind it, and it works really good at doing that and being utilized in that way. So with that, in our next video, I'll go through how to benchmark the carburetor for Carb Cheater, you know, basically how you want to have it all set up before you enable any of this. And then we'll go through all the settings on the app itself and how to best optimize Carb Cheater for, you know, getting your money's worth out of it. So with that, my friends, I appreciate you coming along. I'm going to drive this thing to work a few days and kind of get an idea of what it's doing. I can see my idle setting was obviously too rich, even though it didn't seem like it did, but here we are, we can see that. So clean running engine, an efficient running engine is a happy engine. Carb Cheater goes a long way to do that for you. Alright, so I've already done a bad job of following my own rules. It's just too fun to play with, so I already turned it on because the idle was so bad it actually bothered me enough to do it. And it's still so weird to just see a carburetor basically correct itself. It just feels wrong. So let's turn this thing off and on and just take a look. Totally wild. Alright, so we're maintaining a good idle RPM, good idle AFR. Let's turn this thing off now. You heard the idle instantly drop, and the air-fuel ratio is strikingly leaner. It's just super weird to play with. Now when you turn on, there's a series of questions here. It asks you, do you want to turn on? Yes, I accept. Do you want it at idle, cruise, or both? We want it at both. And then we're going to pick idle RPM. And you can just hear it take off right away. And we're right back to a good idle RPM. And if we pick idle RPM, it will target an idle RPM within an AFR range, which it's doing right now. So that's acceptable AFR. We're targeting idle RPM as the primary, and it's doing a really good job. It's just too fun. I'll go through more of this in our next video here, that if you're watching this and it's old, it's probably linked below, how to benchmark the carb how to interface with the app and make the adjustments you want to make. I'll probably go over air-fuel ratios. I know a lot of people are very loosely familiar or not familiar at all, so that'll be pretty handy. But anyway, it's just a good old time. So if you have yours already and you install it with this video, enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. I keep forgetting to say stuff. By the way, you don't have to have your phone connected for Carb Cheater to run. Your phone is just your user interface or human machine interface, whatever you want to refer to it as, so you can watch things and you can make target adjustments. They all save through power cycles, so technically you never have to connect your phone if you don't want to. And I encourage you not to every time, so you can just enjoy the drive, like this nice scenery. I'm not doing so good at not having the phone connected part though. It's just too fun to watch. Not to mention, finally having a speedometer in this truck is awful handy.